In this short guide video, we're going to learn how to use the short-range proximity sensor. And that is this guy right here. And he's connected up to the JackBord. So first of all, what does it do? It basically lets the JackBord detect objects at close range. So if I put my hand here and you watch the dial on the lower right hand side, as I get closer, the distance falls until eventually I'm on top of it, like I'm right up against it. Okay? Move back, and the distance slowly gets greater and greater. Now the second thing is that it tells you whether you're in direct contact. So I've set this JackBord up so that when the sensor detects an object, it will turn all of the user LEDs on. So as I get closer, it just turns it on. So the sensor has two outputs. The first one is the analog output, which is a voltage that goes from about 0 to say about 3 volts. And that's what you're seeing on the dial on the right hand side there. Okay. The second one is the digital output, and that's what's connected to the wee LED, and that's either on or off. So that gives you no distance information. It's basically it's there or it's not. But the analog one, which is the white line, it's the voltage, that gives you a rough indication of distance. So if I put it on its side, you watch the dial, as I move my hand away, see the distance slowly increases as I catch up a bit. And then I go back in again. It's good out to about 10 centimeters or so. Okay, so this is a short range proximity sensor. And now we'll learn how to connect it to the JackBord and how we can use it. Okay, for this, all you basically need is obviously a JackBord, an M4 bolt, M4 nut, 4 jumper wires, and these are the female ones, some kind of crescent or something you can use to do up an M4 nut, and of course the short range proximity sensor itself. Right, putting this together is really easy. All we're going to do is just bolt the sensor onto the JackBord, and that's just because it makes it easier to use the jumper wires. Otherwise it gets to be a bit of a pain. So the first thing you're going to do is we're going to put it onto port B. So you take the bolt, place it underneath the edge here, hold it on with your finger below, and then put the sensor on and add the nut. It doesn't need to be really super tight, it just needs to be enough so that it doesn't wobble around. So now that we've got the sensor bolted onto the JackBord, it's all nice and secure. The first thing we're going to do is add the ground wire. So this is the green wire, and it needs to go into the green pin or the G pin on the JackBord, like so. And then it goes into the green set of pins on the sensor. So ground wire on the green pin into the green pin on the sensor. The next one is the 3 volts. See, this is yellow here, and that tells us that this sensor wants 3 volts, not 5 volts. So we plug one end into the 3 volt line, other end into the sensor's 3 volt line. So now we've got yellow jumper going from 3 volts on the JackBord into the 3 volt pin on the sensor. The next thing we want to do is connect up the digital output, which according to this one is the black pin here. So we're going to connect a wire from the black pin, and it's going to go around to port pin B2 on the JackBord. That's what we want. We want it on B2, which is this one here. Okay? And round to the black pins. And we will add the analog wire later on. For this next bit, we're just going to do the logic output. Okay? So basically, we took the sensor, we used an M4 nut and bolt to bolt it onto the JackBord where port B is. We added a ground wire, which went from the green side on the sensor to the G pin on port B of the JackBord. We then added a 3 volt wire from the yellow pins on the sensor round to the 3 volt pins on the JackBord. And lastly, we added a black wire to go from the black digital pin on the sensor around to port pin B2 on the JackBord. And here are some reference pictures for the wire connections. On the left we see the connections to the JackBord, and on the right we can see them from the perspective of the sensor. So check your wiring against these, and don't worry if your jumper wires are a different color, that doesn't matter. As long as they go in the right places, you're fine. Okay, so the first thing we've got to do is turn on the JackBord by pressing the power button like this, and you should see both of the LEDs on the sensor light up as they have here. And next we're in the dashboard, so we're going to click on the play icon, and this will bring up the command page, which is where we're going to use the sensor. Okay, now that we've got the JackBord turned on and the sensors connected, we'll start off by using some simple commands. And the first one is going to be the BTP or button press command. And remember for these that the sensor's digital output is connected to port pin B2. So the first command is going to be BTP, which is button press, space B2, because it's on pin 2, space L on. L on turns on all of the user LEDs. So press enter. The next command is the BTR, which is the button release command. So that's BTR, again, B2, L off. And L off turns all of the user LEDs off. So I press enter again. Now what should happen is that when I go up to the sensor, the user LEDs turn on. See in the ones inside? And then when I go away from the sensor, they turn off. So we've made our first command for the proximity sensor. So essentially now I can detect whether something is close to the sensor. And if you look up on the dashboard at the top, you see that the B2 icon goes green when I'm up close to the sensor, and then it goes red when I'm far away from the sensor. So you can then use B2 in your programs and so forth and other commands, as we'll do in a wee while, to actually see what's going on with it. So this is a very simple proximity detector or alarm. If something comes close, it turns all the LEDs on. If it goes far away, it turns them off. It's almost like a very, very, very close-up night light. Okay, now that we've mastered the digital output, we'll look at the analog or the voltage output. So take the fourth jumper wire and we're going to plug it into the white pins on the sensor here. And then the other end is going to go into port pin B1 on the JackBord. So this is the analog output from the proximity sensor going from the white pins all the way to port pin B1 on the JackBord. And these are some pictures you can use to check the connection of the white analog wire. Compare yours and make sure that they match up okay. Now a good way to test the analog output of the sensor is to use a short program. Now the code for this program, there will be a link to it in the description of the video. For those of you who have not done programming, don't panic. All the program is a collection of commands, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. So we're going to start the program, we're going to print a little message, then this part here gets a voltage reading from the sensor and scales it between 0 and 100. And remember that the analog output from the sensor is on port pin B1, which is why we've got port pin B1 here. Next, we have the BTP command. So all we're doing here is exactly what we did earlier on. We're setting it up so that port pin B2, when you put something close to the sensor, it will turn on all of the user LEDs. And likewise, when you take something away from the sensor, it will turn them off. So this is the setting up of the program. The next part here is the program loop, and this is the bit that we just keep on repeating the whole time. And all we're doing is printing distance and then the value on port pin B1. And down here, finally, we're just waiting a wee while, 100 milliseconds, just so we don't go too fast. So if I run this program, you can see over here that it's printing the distances. And like before, it was 40, it's about the maximum. So if I bring my hand in slowly, you should see the values falling, and then eventually the button press kicks in. So you see the user LEDs here are turning on. Right, back off. So basically out to about 10 centimeters, we've got a crude kind of radar. So I go in, you can see the values falling, and then the user LEDs turn on. So this is a simple program that displays the distance values from the short-range proximity sensor when you're using the analog output. Now just one more thing, and that is to stop the program running, click on the stop button here. And remember to start the program, click on the run button, which happens to be a rocket, and then to stop it, you click on the stop button. This next program is slightly more complex because what we've done is we are adding in some graphical elements. So for example here, we're adding a quit button, which you'll see in a minute. And then down here, instead of printing the values, we are displaying them in a gauge. That's the PG command. So the best way for you to see this is for me to simply run it. So over here on the right hand side, click on the show page. See, there it is from a previous running. And then we click run. And so the gauge is displaying the current value coming from the sensor. So again, if I put my hand close, you watch. See? Values start falling, the gauge starts showing it. Let it go again. So again, the code for this program will be in the description of the video. So that's a gauge, and to stop it with this one you click quit and the program will stop. Right, this is a quick summary. This is a short-range proximity sensor. It lets you detect the presence of an object at very close range or the distance to an object out to about 10 centimeters. It has 4 sets of pins. The green ones here connect to the ground pin on the JackBord. The yellow ones here connect to the 3-volt line on the JackBord. The black ones are the digital output, which is either on or off. Things there or it's not there. Nothing in between. And then the white pins are the analog output. So they have a voltage that is directly proportional to how far away the object is from the sensor. And finally, under here, and we'll look at this in a minute, is the sensor itself. Now this is a view of the sensor from the underside. And over here, you can see that there are 2 LEDs. These are what actually detect the distance. First of all, this blue one is an infrared transmitter, and it's what sends out the infrared signal. So if you imagine this is like a torch, you turn on a torch at night time, and if there's nothing in front of you, like if you just point it up at the sky, you'll see nothing because there's nothing to reflect the light back. And your eyes are the receivers. On this proximity sensor, this is an infrared receiver. And if there is something in the way, that thing will reflect back some of the infrared signal. Just like at night time when you shine a torch on something, the only reason that you see it is because it is reflecting light back to you. And that's exactly how this works, but over a very short range. So this transmitter here transmits the infrared, and this one receives it. And then the JackBord's USI, which is this part here, takes that and gives it to the JackBord in a form that it can use. So you want some more information, visit us at www.jackbord.works.